And this one's a little bit dear to my heart, being a contractor. But, and this is for GHD. Would GHD be comfortable in providing reliance on the investigation work that they undertake, like geotechnical and particularly contamination? Are you on? It's on. Just talk.
Is the mic on? Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good question, Piers. And well, look, we do already, right, on a lot of the stuff that we do. So all of the factual geotechnical work that we would do in terms of the bore logs or whatever, that's relatively industry standard that we would do that. I think one of the key challenges that we need to deal with in terms of reliance on information generally is the contracts and the regimes that we put around the purpose with which that information or that design is generated. And I think as long as we're really clear what the purpose is as to why we're designing something or why we've produced information, and it's all taken in context, then I think that's a relatively straightforward thing to do. But it is around how you structure all of that and the liability regimes that go with it.
Okay, thanks, because I can see some big, particularly time savings in that. You were talking about wastage. If we get some information during the tender stage and then we have to go out and almost replicate it during delivery, and it has a big impact on our program, particularly at the moment. Site investigation rigs, just so tricky to find at the moment.
Yeah, and look, we've worked on contracts, some of which we're working on at the moment, where the way the contract was structured, not only were we not able to rely upon the information that we were given, in fact, if we even used that information, that triggered a carve-out to our limit of liability. So we ended up in a situation where we were taking more liability for someone else's investigation work than we were for our own, which just felt like a really perverse outcome. And when I had discussions with the client about this, that was an outcome that they didn't realise had been created through the contract, which, and I don't know if we have any external lawyers in the room, but through a contract which had been drafted by an external lawyer. So it is really about how we review all of those things to make sure that the contractual framework we're putting around what we're doing is actually creating what we want as an outcome at the end of the day.
I see one question from the floor here.
Hi, Rod Pomeroy. Question of the panel. I've got two questions. One is earned value. That wasn't discussed today at all, about performance during the contract. The second thing is we've been heavily impacted by type approvals in trying to get our products, our innovative products, into the market. The ARA put out a report last week which showed $350 million per annum is potential saving by having a process that works and gives a fair go, I guess, for companies trying to bring in new products. Just interested in what the the panel would like to talk about that.
Would you like to do that? Christina, would you like to earn value? Or?
Look, what's the question in relation to earned value? Sorry, what do you mean as far as that's
concerned? There's two questions there. One is earned value, and that hasn't been discussed this morning. The second one is type approvals, because that's a real impact in railways. And it's really bad across the jurisdictions in Australia. They don't accept European or Class 1 railways from other parts of the world. They insist everything's different here, which is absolute nonsense. And, there is just a whole process that we've been waiting 2.5 years in WA to get type approval. And I won't even talk about New South Wales because we haven't even got started there.
So maybe I'll touch on the second one because, sorry, I'm still not quite sure what the question is on earned value. But in terms of approvals, that to me falls under the bucket of innovation that I was talking about earlier. And this is where that was the point that we were trying to make in the discussion that we had with Minister Stokes earlier this week, was it's no good just asking industry to innovate if government and the regulators are not also incentivised to push innovation through and to actually spend time on innovation. And we actually had a discussion around, would it help if there was and there were no promises made, so don't take this, but would it help if there was a separate group that was set up to look at how you shepherd innovations or different ideas through an approval process? Because I think that is one of the challenges, is how are the people who are commenting on the things that we put up incentivised? What is in their best interest? And right now I would say it's in their best interest to reduce and minimise risk. They're not necessarily looking to how they can create a more innovative outcome, even though that's what the expectation of industry is. So that was the point I was trying to make, was it's not just good enough to say, I don't think to industry at the moment, go out and innovate and create something different. It's really that whole ecosystem that needs to be incentivised in the same direction.
The earned value one is very important too, and Transport's been doing that for a while in terms of measuring the performance on a month-by-month basis, but it doesn't seem to really have an impact. I mean, if anything, the contractors are probably frightened the hell of it, but because it is showing up where they're starting to fail. And, you know, I just think there needs to be more emphasis on that. The other thing I would also comment on my career, one of the most successful projects I think I worked on was Sydney Airport Rail Link. And we had very small project teams, management teams on those. Like 16 people managed that whole project, 15 kilometres of new tunnels and tracks and stations. Today you've got something like 800 people doing the same job in Metro. It's absolutely ridiculous, you know. You just need to find other ways of being able to do this stuff. And anyway, that's a comment.
Sorry, there's another question from the middle there.
Just touching on government and the regulators and that innovation bucket. Obviously, we've got a lot of processes that are driven by those parties, like our TEO accreditation and whatnot. Do you see a place for those that entity to push down things like lean construction? Because obviously, a lot of things that we do from systems perspective, our management plans, all those sorts of things. If it's driven down by the client, you know, thinking of Rebecca going to meetings where questions aren't able to be asked. If those lean processes are, you know, brought in client side, would that drive, you know, the contractors and the suppliers to do the same?
It absolutely would. And we've done some exercises with government agencies around something called value stream mapping, where you really look at, you know, the value stream across an activity or a project and what it's supposed to deliver, and which of the activities are actually adding value, which ones are not value adding but necessary because there's legislation around it or whatnot. And the staggering fact is that usually about half is neither. But we never ever look at it because, you know, A, we're too busy, or this is just the way how we do things, and people just believe that it is necessary to get to that value outcome. And, you know, the statistic we're running at the moment, it's above 50% that, you know, the color that those activities get that are neither value adding or necessary are just there because we've always done it that way. And if you can get you know, any organization, including government, to actually take a good hard look at that, the savings are just enormous.
And particularly when you see the resources, when you see bodies like Metro that literally have a 1-to-1 ratio of every person that we have on the project, you know, it's hard to get resources for the job when they've all gone to Metro to overlook the project. So, you know, it's sort of, we're catching ourselves out when we put up numbers like that. Like we can't keep at that pace, but then we definitely need to be looking at how we're structuring these things when we need those resources on the ground.
Yeah, and it's just to make something clear, and that's what I meant to say with it needs to be a holistic activity. It's actually, it works on projects, but it needs to be a corporate initiative at the end of the day to maintain those results and really make it fly to the extent that it can add the value. So it can't just be, you know, 1 or 2 resources on any one project trying to fix that. It needs to be a corporate decision to say, you know, for this government entity and or for this department and or for this construction or design company, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to look at, and this is how we're going to get to operational excellence. So just making that very, very clear that if you try to do spot trading, some of the lean tools will help you in the short term and lead to some great results, but it's not sustainable unless you lift it up to that higher level.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Whereabouts? Oh, thank you.
Hi, Will here from CPB. Rebecca, you touched on 4 major reasons for waste in our projects. I'd like to suggest a 5th, which is change. We see an enormous amount of change and it causes an enormous amount of waste, and it comes from all kinds of sources. design optimization, the construction team, the client, operators, other stakeholder changes. Would you agree with that assessment? And for all the panel, what do you suggest is the way to address and deal with this throughout the whole process? Because I remember you had a very good chart about the involvement with these parties all the way along.
Yeah, look, there's a few more elements of waste, and change is certainly one of those. We have change control processes for major programs and major projects, actually, and sometimes those change control processes take a long time, and then they're pushed aside and decisions are made, without taking into account all the change consideration. Contract structures have a really big impact on that. I worked on the Sydney Metro Northwest, which was a PPP client side, and it was really clear in that sort of structure that change, just don't do it, don't go there, and that actually kept us on target and really focused. It's always better to do the planning up front and understand the projects and the requirements and what you're trying to achieve. And change is really, a massive waste of time, so long as it delivers the benefits. If the change is really needed and there's a good reason for it, but change, you've got to be really careful.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm working with projects where sometimes the value that the change adds is actually less than what it costs to implement it. And again, coming back to Crossrail, within those 6 months, they really had a look at what are we going to standardize, and then that does not get touched. We don't care who or why, that's what it stays. But then where are some of the opportunities in the innovation space, and or where some real value add areas where we should look at different things and should change what it looks like at the moment. But again, that needs to be an overarching initiative across the whole project or an organization at the front end. Because what I'm seeing out on projects a lot is that people are winging it. Some area manager thinking, I can save 10 grand here, and on the latest project that cost us over 150. So it's, establishing that culture that standardization is a good thing. It's not being lazy. It's not being, something that is second grade. This is a good thing, so that we actually have that little time that's left to look at where does it actually count, where could we spend that time to innovate and really spend the money to get some real value add out of it.
Just to add, so I can just add quickly to that, I really agree with that comment. And for me, where it comes down to is everyone aligned and incentivised on the same pathway? Because there are occasions when change is good and when someone can come up with a better option through the course of the project. But it's really about everyone agreeing up front what the ultimate aim of the project is. And if that area manager is making a change, can you look at that and assess that it is actually helping everyone achieve the overall project outcome at the end of the day? And that's why you do need to have that alignment from the operations and maintenance team, the client, the contractor, the designer, everyone understanding exactly what the overall outcomes are and being able to measure and structure any of that change or value management in that same way.
And I think one critical element to that is that clients at the front end need to define what value is to them. And it can't be this motherhood statement that we always get with, it's time, cost, quality, and make it work. It's call it. For this specific project, what is it? And then the culture can be built around that, and the team can really focus. Whilst you're still drawn in all kinds of directions, that's how change comes about. Because, okay, if I look at that part of the triangle, then I'll do that, and somebody else has a different focus, and it goes exactly 180 degrees the other direction. So, that value proposition at the front end, and in every tender that goes out, there is this paragraph that says this is the value proposition from the client side and I haven't seen a good one yet, not a single one. So it's also kind of how do we get there?
I love the time, cost, quality one, because you can have two, but not all three. Yeah. We've got time for one more quick question here in the middle of the floor.
Thank you. This is Yazan from RB Infrastructure. Just a question for GHD representative here. Digital engineering have been saving the industry millions of dollars. Why is lifecycle BIM is not a common practice?
That's a big question. Why is it not a common practice? I think there's a couple of different things. And I'm assuming by lifecycle BIM, you're meaning the model that we spoke about that runs the whole way through from the start of design all the way to the end. A couple of different things. One of them is who is owning that model. So in a lot of cases, it may start off with some client-supplied data. It gets passed to a designer, potentially then gets passed to another designer, or even it gets stopped and they create a new one. Then the contractor might pick it up. Do they use all the aspects of the model? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And then when it gets to the operator and maintainer at the end of the day, is it in a format that plugs into their asset management system that they can then use? Do they have all the tools and all the training to be able to use that? And look, Transport for New South Wales have done a great thing a long while ago in actually setting the marker out there and putting out what their BIM standards are and what they want to be able to achieve. But they're still not using those models effectively in the operations and maintenance part of the project lifecycle, even though we've been building these models for 10 years or so with some of this data in there. So there's a range of issues. Some of it is around liability of the information that's put in there and how that's treated and the level of accuracy of it, and some of it is around the inconsistency of who's owning it and the standards of how it runs the whole way through.
And if I could just add to that, I think it also stems from the misunderstanding that we think BIM is a technology. It's not. It's a model of working together collaboratively and using technology to achieve that. And because we're just looking at the technology bit of it, it's kind of, it gets handed on and people get involved at the wrong end of it. And what it was supposed to be was very much a new way of working together enabled by technology. It's not about the technology. So, the next time you start a BIM project, do me a favor and think about how is the process with the technology going to work to get the best outcome, rather than just, great, we can read it easier.
Okay. I'd like to thank all three for giving their presentation. So, Rory, Christina, and Rebecca, thank you very much.